Could landlords go bankrupt as a result of the new Renters' Rights Bill coming in? That's some of the headlines we've seen in the national press. And in this video, I'm going to share with you two major risks that all landlords face and how to overcome those risks. So first of all, let's talk about the fact that with the Renters' Rights Bill, they're changing how long a tenant gets to stay in a property. It's now a rolling contract that's going to come into place. And also how long until you can take a tenant who's not paying to court. So basically now it's a rolling contract. 2 months notice is pretty what people need to give you. So someone can stay in a property for 2 months and then leave essentially. And also if a tenant is not paying their rent, currently if a tenant is 2 months late, i.e. 1 month and 1 day, you can then apply to a Section 21 to get them out of the property, to take the property back. Now, as you know, Section 21s are being abolished. You can still use Section 8s. However, with the new Renters' Rights Bill, people have to be 3 months in arrears before you can take them to court. Then when you go to court, you've got to get a hearing, and courts are swamped and overwhelmed. This is one of the problems at the moment. There's not enough funding for the court system. And even once you get a court date, if you're given possession, you then have to wait for a bailiff date as well. And there are just not enough bailiffs in the country. Understandably, it's not a great job, not paid very well. Would you want to be a bailiff? I certainly wouldn't. So what this means is it could be at least 9 months until a tenant who's not paying you rent actually gets out the property, you get the property back. So let's consider this scenario. Let's say you've got a property and a tenant does pay for 3 months in a financial year, but the other 9 months of the year they're not paying. Now, if you've got a mortgage, you've got to pay your mortgage, and that could be a lot of money going out, particularly if you're unlucky and it's several properties where you have this problem with tenants who are not paying. Now, most tenants, by the way, are really good people. They're gonna pay the rent, it's not a problem. However, bad things happen to good tenants. They go off the rails and they can't afford to pay the rent. And also there is a small number of professional bad tenants who know the law very, very well and will use it to their benefit and take advantage of landlords who are maybe not so clued up. So you've got 3 months of income coming in, then 9 months where you've got to pay the mortgage. But also, interestingly, at the end of that tax year, even though you would have lost a huge amount of money, the tax man will say, well, hang on a minute, on those 3 months of rental income, actually there was some phantom profit because you can't offset all of your interest you pay on your mortgage. So you could have the scenario where landlords have lost a huge amount of money, and at the end of the financial year, the tax man still wants their cut of their phantom profit. And that's because of Section 24, which, by the way, was introduced by the Conservative government. So it seems that all governments seem to be conspiring against the landlords and wanted to be in the favour of tenants. Now, I understand maybe politically there are far more tenants than there are landlords, so maybe people think they're going to win votes, but actually I don't think it makes that much difference. Now, the other challenge, obviously, with the Renters' Rights Bill, the new policy that's coming in, is what's called a Rent Repayment Order. Now, this is where a landlord has not done their job correctly. And by the way, I'm all in favour of levelling up and landlords treating their property like a business rather than a hobby. You know, most landlords are very, very good, but there are some bad landlords. Now, unfortunately, when you bring regulation in, the bad landlords don't really care. They don't do anything about it. And maybe these measures are being brought in to act as a bigger deterrent to the bad landlords to become good landlords doing what they should do. I'm not sure that really works. HMO licensing came in 2007, and there are still some landlords who have HMOs who don't have HMO licenses. Also, all landlords are supposed to protect deposits. My good friend Paul Champagnat, he runs My Deposits, and says there are still landlords who are saying they still haven't protected deposits. So you could bring legislation in. Sometimes it's through ignorance, lack of knowledge, or sometimes just complete disregard for the law. Not all landlords are going to conform. But that, as I said, is a very small number of landlords. Now, with the rent repayment orders, if landlords have not done all the things that they've not given the prescribed information to when tenants move in, or maybe, unfortunately, like Rachel Reeves has just discovered, if you live in an area that requires selective licensing, but you haven't got a license, then the tenants can come and claim back the rent. Now, currently, it's 12 months rent. So Rachel Reeves' tenant should be trying at the moment to claim back a year of rental income because unfortunately her and her husband didn't take the advice of the local letting agent and didn't put a license in place. Now, maybe in Rachel Reeves' defence, and I Never thought I'd say those words. The agency have said that there was a change of staff and they didn't follow it up, and they should have done that. And whether Rachel can sue them, I don't know. However, you must remember that as a landlord, ultimately we are still responsible. If we have a letting agent look after our properties, yes, we hope and expect them to do the right things, but ultimately the buck stops with us. With the Renters' Rights Bill, it's going from 12 months up to 24 months that a tenant can claim if you haven't done everything as you should do. So the first thing to protect yourself is you really need to understand exactly what is coming in, exactly what is required, and make sure that you and your letting agent are doing everything that is necessary. So I would speak to your letting agent and check what are they doing to prepare for the Renters' Rights Bill coming in. For example, you absolutely need to make sure all your certificates are up to date, your gas safety certificates, your electrical certificates, these need to be in order. And there's going to be a national database, which I think is a good idea. So your tenant can check to see if your property is listed on there, and if it's not, you're technically not supposed to be able to rent it. And also, are all the certificates up to date? So that's a simple admin thing. Now, I've said to my letting agent who looks after most of my Birmingham properties, she used to 30 days before a notice is required, she would contact the gas engineer. However, these people are busy, sometimes you can't get access to the property. So what we're doing now is 60 days before something is required, my letting agent gets a notice and she can start taking action to make sure all the certificates are issued in time. Now, the next thing we need to do is we need to make sure that we are bringing the very best tenants into the property. I would recommend that when you are looking to bring a tenant in, you obviously check the tenant out, and as well as the normal checks, I would go on their social media, I would Google their name, see what you can find out about them. And if you're not sure about a tenant, you don't have to take them on. Obviously, we cannot discriminate against anyone, but in this world where there is not enough accommodation and there's something like 9 applications for every property available for rent, you can absolutely pick and choose who you would like to come into your property, and that is still your right to do. So be very careful who you take in as a tenant is the first point. Secondly, where possible, I would always get a guarantor. A guarantor is someone who, if your tenant doesn't pay, you can pursue the guarantor to get payment. Now, ideally, the guarantor needs to be a property owner, because if you pursued them and they didn't pay, ultimately you get a CCJ against them, which is not good for any property owner. If someone says, oh, my boyfriend or girlfriend could be my guarantor, that's probably not a suitable person. And actually, if someone is from overseas, it's very difficult to get a guarantor if they live internationally. However, there are various platforms where you can actually go and the tenant can pay an insurance policy and get a guarantor. So maybe check those out, they might be worth doing. The next thing you need to do when you take on a tenant, obviously you get the tenant details, very important, get their name, their date of birth, and their national insurance number. This is important because if you have a tenant who doesn't pay their rent, you can then go to moneyclaim.gov, get a judgment against them, and you have up to 6 years to claim your money back. What I suggest you do is maybe sit back and wait, and maybe let them settle down, and maybe in the future they'll get their own home, etc. And then you can present them with this claim. You send a High Court sheriff in, and they can seize goods, they can get an attachment to their earnings. I've had to do this, unfortunately, for I had one professional bad tenant in my property. And ironically, this lady, actually, she was a graduate. She worked for a charity who helped people who are in financial difficulty. So she knew about all the things that can and can't do, and she just played the system. Luckily, I know how to manage these things, and we were able to get all of the rent back from her, and she picked up the costs of the bailiff and all the expenses. Now, there might well be some people watching this who are tenants, who might be thinking, at last, it's about right, the tenants get better rights and look after these unscrupulous landlords. And I agree, there are some bad landlords out there. But I think you'll find the vast majority of landlords are actually good people just providing a service. And it's interesting, you need to understand the consequence of what's happening because of these major changes, probably the biggest change in the last 30 years to the private rental sector. There are many, many landlords who are thinking about retiring early or actually just getting out of the property game. What that means is they are getting rid of good tenants. More Section 21s are being served right now while you can still do it to get rid of tenants who are actually perfectly good tenants just because the landlord wants the property back because they want to sell that property, because they don't want to be a landlord anymore. So this is going to have an adverse effect. Unfortunately, I think there'll be less rental property available for rent. It's going to be harder to find rental properties. Rents are probably going to go up. There are some tenants saying, at last, landlords are only going to be able to put up the rent once a year. Well, let me tell you, categorically, the vast majority of landlords who have long-term tenants, they don't increase the rent every year. Why? Because if you have a good tenant in the property, you want to keep that good tenant there. And whilst you might be able to raise the rents, rather than doing that, you want to keep them there, because if they get fed up and want to move, often we have to spend money refurbishing the property before we put the new tenants in. There's going to be some void periods. There's costs of getting tenants into the property. So most landlords, myself included, we do not raise the rents as much as we can. However, I think because this new regulation, most landlords are going to be conscious of it and probably will raise the rent every single year. So whilst the legislation can be good, whilst levelling up is good, and I'm all for that, unfortunately, I think the Labour government have just gone too far with the Renters' Rights Bill. Unfortunately, it's tenants and landlords who are going to suffer because of this intervention in what should be a free market. So let's wait and see what happens. I guess the final nail in the coffin might be in a few weeks' time when we get the second budget from the Chancellor. Let's see what Labour have in plan. I don't know what they're going to do. And I must admit, I wouldn't want to be in Rachel Reeves' position right now. It's a very difficult position she's in. I think they might break some of their election promises. Who knows? And I think there's definitely going to be more tax heading our way. If you are an investor, if you're a high net worth person, I think we're going to pay more tax. By the way, if you're thinking about maybe I should go and live in Dubai, I'm sure you've seen the policy that also the government is talking about introducing a tax for people who want to exit the country. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's happening. It's just not a good situation, unfortunately. Look, I do hope you've got some information out of this video. It's going to help you protect yourself, particularly if you're a landlord, you're concerned, you don't know what to do. Look, we are needed. The country needs good landlords like us to provide good quality, affordable accommodation for people who can't afford to buy or who don't want to buy. And unfortunately, it looks like the odds are stacked against us. Those of us staying in the market, if we're investing long term, we're going to do okay. We just need to adapt and learn to adhere to all of the new rules. If you've liked this video, please like the video. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're almost 30,000 subscribers now. And make sure you hit the bell icon to make sure you're notified any time a video comes out. I'm going to be doing some very timely videos after the budget, after the Bank of England interest rate rises, to keep you up to date, to let you know what's going on, what you should do. So make sure you subscribe, hit the bell icon. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Invest with knowledge, invest with skill.